Welcome to All Things Work. I'm your host, Ann Sparacco. For this episode, we're recording at SHRM Talent 2025, an annual conference providing cutting-edge insight organizations need to retain their top talent and to get the best candidates from a dynamic talent pool. For more information and to register for any and all SHRM events, just go to the link in this episode's description. Today, we're exploring how to build more inclusive workplaces for individuals with disabilities and how to implement more accessible and equitable practices so every member of your team can contribute their top talent. And joining us to guide us through this conversation is a speaker from SHRM Talent, Mike Hess, founder and executive director of the Blind Institute of Technology, aka BIT. Welcome to All Things Work, Mike.
Thank you, Ann, for having me. It's truly an honor.
We're so excited to have you. So tell us a little bit more about BIT, your organization. You founded it a little over 12 years ago. What led you to create it?
Sure. Honestly, it was so my tech background started way back in the early mid-90s when there was a global tech bubble being created that really we didn't realize. So it was the first global tech bubble because of Y2K. So for those in the audience who don't know what Y2K is, it's year 2000. It's when the date changes was going from 2-digit date fields to 4-digit date fields. And in the mid 90s, it created this huge influx of talent globally. All sorts of organizations were just jumping at the bit looking for new talent. And so if you could spell Y2K and you had any kind of coding skills, you were guaranteed a gig back in the mid 90s. And that's exactly how I got into my private industry coding skill set. And I spent 20 years in private industry working for Fortune 5, Fortune 600 brands, managing 7-8 figure projects over my career. However, I did well. I was having skip levels with the C-suite, doing really well in my career. However, it was just always evident that I was the token blind person. And it wasn't even just blindness though, right? Like, so with my cane, I never bumped into anybody in a wheelchair, never heard of anybody using ASL as their primary means of communication. And neurodivergence was absolutely a non-topic. And yet I worked in tech and I clearly worked around individuals who were on the spectrum. They were just considered eccentric, right? So I with the blessing of my best friend and better half, told my wife, I'm like, hey, I'm going to quit my 6-figure income and I'm going to start a nonprofit to address the egregious unemployment, and I call it an unemployment epidemic. And it's numbers that just aren't talked about a lot. But the numbers are there to support the fact that it's just it's an egregious epidemic that's out there for people with disabilities, and that's why I started BIT.
And we've come a long way, but there's still so much more progress we need to make in this realm. So can you talk about your organization's mission?
Sure. Yeah, it's simple. Like it's to address the unemployment rate for pan disability. So literally from, visible and invisible disabilities, apparent, non-apparent disabilities, it's all of them. We represent all of them. We are a workforce development solution for professionals with disabilities, serving professionals with disabilities on 4 continents and achieving employment on 3 of them now.
You talked about this a little bit, like how you said, neurodivergence. Just seemed like, somebody just had a different personality, or somebody might think, oh, this person's weird, but really it's something that it's not apparent a lot of times. So what are some other common misconceptions you'd like to share about that people might have about employees with disabilities?
Yeah, so it's
I know we could call on like a whole episode on this, but we'll keep it brief.
Yes and no. And so here's the thing, what we attempt, like our philosophy working with employers, large and small, is quite honestly, the disability community isn't a them statement.
Right.
It's an us statement. So again, when you start thinking about just the pure numbers, there's more than 1 billion of us that identify with disabilities on this planet. Okay, so statistically speaking, that's not a small number, right? And we start thinking about like everybody listening to this knows somebody, whether it's somebody that's aging into disability, somebody who's born with disability, somebody from an accident acquires their disability. And if we think about this, like, so it's not a them statement, it's an us statement, right? And Father Time is undefeated. And as we age, right, like if we're so lucky to live into our 90s or our centenarian ages, our eyesight will diminish, our hearing will diminish, our mental faculties will diminish, our motor skills will diminish, right? And yet we're so afraid to talk about disability in the workplace.
And so, can you discuss how managers, company leaders, really anybody involved in the workplace, can really help challenge these biases?
Sure. If you want to make systemic enterprise changing moves for an organization, regardless of philosophy, whether it's in tech or whatever the philosophy might be, you have to start with organizational development, right? And helping organizations realize that, okay, so first of all, it's not a them statement, it's an us statement. Helping them feel more comfortable, because I let folks know all the time, like, I'm blind, not dead. I can feel the uncomfortableness, right? So I can tell when folks, like the cane, it's very evident. And we'll talk about this conversation more in a minute, how I get into the neuroscience of all these conversations.
Right.
But
Yeah.
we lead with this conversation to realize, like, when you feel a little uncomfortable or maybe what I call squishy, right, around the disability conversation, let's lean into that a little bit more and realize, like, you're not a bad person for feeling that way. And actually, there's some things that are happening with what I call our organic operating system, our 3 pounds of gray matter, our brains, that happen automatically. We don't even realize it's happening. So let's dive into that, because there's so much that's happening that's making this conversation taboo.
Right. I like how you said squishy. It just kind of like makes people like you can feel the discomfort. You can feel that.
Yes.
I understand that a lot. So in your session here at SHRM Talent, it's called Art of Blinders. You were talking a lot about how cognitive processes influence decision making and hiring and workplace practices, especially as they relate to inclusivity for employees with disabilities. So, can you elaborate on those ideas for us just a little bit?
We're talking what's happening real time, right? We don't realize that they're actually happening. So we get into behavioral economics, that Dr. Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winning economist. We talk about Dr. John Medina, neuroscientist, like data that's coming out of Malcolm Gladwell's books. Like, we're talking about real data, scientific data that's out there that's supporting this. Because if I'm talking about organizational development, shifting enterprises, right, and how they look, how they address somebody like me who's blind, but the broader disability community, we have to talk about what's happening, and we don't realize that it's happening automatically. And there are things that are happening automatically that may or may not influence you in a positive way, if we don't know about that. And so we're digging into that, right? And uh, I stopped asking the question years ago. So how many blind people do you have working for you anyway? Because it's either a very uncomfortable silence, or they're like, oh, we have this one, right? So then we're talking about tokenism. So we're not talking about, scalable talent solutions. We're talking about tokenism at that point in time. So talking about that neuroscience, talking about the behavioral economics, talking about, the books like Blink and, what's happening in a millisecond betwixt our ears, and the actual scientific data around this is the key to get this going from an organization perspective.
And so, in your work, you emphasize the importance of multi-sensory learning when it comes to fostering inclusion. So let's first, can you break down what exactly multi-sensory learning is?
Yeah, it's Dr. John Medina. He's a neuroscientist at the University of Washington. He's got an amazing book I've read 7,000 times, called Brain Rules. So you go and you read this book on neuroscience, and he talks about how when you leverage more than one sense during the transfer of information, i.e. the learning process,
Okay.
when you leverage more than one sense, and the 5 senses we're talking about are sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell.
Mm-hmm.
Sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. Those are the 5 senses we're talking about. When you leverage more than one of those during the learning process, your retention and recall will go up exponentially. And here's a beautiful thing about neuroscience. It's all quantifiable, right? So it's data driven, right? And so organizational leaders are always wanting to, like, how do we become more effective versions of ourselves, right? I.e. more profitable, whatever that may be, right? Usually bottom line driven. Well, it's understanding, again, what's happening automatically betwixt our ears that we don't realize that's happening. And are we tapping into, like, if we did that automatically, how much more effective we would be? And here's neuroscience telling us unequivocally if we leverage more than 1 sense. And so, for example, so we're reading a book, and we all, well, maybe not SHRM's listeners, but we've all heard of people who have crammed for exams. Not you, Ann, or SHRM's listeners. Other folks,
Yeah,
though.
not for the SHRM
Not the SHRM
certification.
population, right? So folks that are cramming for those exams. And we lose 90% because when we're just visually looking at something, we'll lose 90% of that information within hours or days after just consuming that information with 1 sense sight. And yet, it's, again, quantifiable. They're able to prove if you're listening to that same content, and all operating systems have this capability now to read that text back to you. So if you're reading it visually and listening to it through the auditory, your retention and recall goes up exponentially. So understanding that our brains, all of our brains, have this amazing ability to use multiple senses, right? And be able, and it helps with that retention and recall. So it's not just a blind person superhero power. We all have this. However, are we paying attention to what happens naturally well with our organic operating systems?
So many simple but easy, like great steps, powerful steps to follow. Just in everyday life, let alone the workplace. So would love to touch on, the technology side here because it plays an essential role in
It does.
accessibility. What are some effective tech solutions or even just accommodations that are proven to empower employees with disabilities?
So we always leaning into, organizational development, helping folks feel less squishy about the conversation around disability. It's a great place to start. However, it's for somebody who's blind, like myself, digital equity, digital accessibility is a must. So we as an organization, we threw our, name in the hat in the ring when it came to workforce development 8 years ago now, to level professionals with disabilities up within tech, future-proofed tech certification tracks. And we chose Salesforce as our primary workforce development initiative for two primary reasons. So first, of course, everybody knows the name Salesforce. But second, and kind of a best kept secret about Salesforce, from a workforce development side, so a B2B, not a B2C, right? Not a consumer facing side, but a B2B where workforce development happens. Salesforce is the most digitally accessible business enterprise application on the planet. So for a screen reader user like myself, we're able to get people with disabilities, and we have on 4 continents, screen reader users, other people with disabilities certified in the Salesforce economy. And on 3 continents, we've been able to achieve employment because everything that we do is from the employment lens. And so without leaders in digital accessibility like Salesforce, we truly wouldn't have the global impact that BIT is making today.
And so kind of jumping to the other side there, there may even be some, tools organizations may not realize are negatively impacting accessibility. What are there any technologies like that should be reevaluated? Let's create a little awareness here.
So the unemployment epidemic is, I believe what's spurring the unemployment epidemic for people with disabilities holistically is truly a gap in, awareness, right? Education, and then ultimately in digital equity, right? And yet we know for a fact we have really large Fortune 5 organizations that have proved emphatically that making digital equity happen for their platforms is less than an additional 3% level of effort, right? So we're not talking a huge cost when we're talking about making products equitable, right? It's the intentionality around that. Right. But so that this whole awareness gap for organizations. So not to throw brands out there, it's more leadership inside of organizations, right? It's the CHROs and the CPOs and the CIOs and CTOs for them to realize like, hey, we're not talking massive cost here. We're talking lack of intentionality. We're talking lack of awareness.
Exactly. And I think the awareness really and education just, carries you so far.
Absolutely.
Because especially once you're made aware of something, you can't not think about it when something like that comes up again. It's forever in your brain when you learn that lesson.
You could
So
put your blinders on if you choose,
put your
right?
blinders on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could put your blinders on. So
So how exactly would an organization audit their tech to test for accessibility? That's something I'm really curious
yeah,
about.
these tools are pervasive now. A lot of them are just Chrome extensions. There's all sorts of free tools and that sort of thing that are out there. So an organization could get started for literally low or little financial effort whatsoever. It's just about being intentional. Now, if you really want to dive deep into, let's say, superiority, like an organization like a Salesforce or whatnot do, you need to have that user experience for native assistive technology users and make sure that, again, it's kind of the whole nothing about us without us kind of, phrasing around this, include people with disabilities. And honestly, for organizations that, you're kind of interested in the disability conversation, a lot of times, dipping your toe in kind of that disability talent pond is as easy as saying, hey, we got some digital assets. Maybe we could. It starts just with that, just including us in some of those decisions, reaching out like Blind Institute Technology. It's one of our expertises as well. So
It's an untapped one of the untapped talent pools we talk about here at SHRM.
it's when you think about a billion strong globally, a billion strong, right? And I've heard numbers as high as like 1.6 billion. So even if it's just a billion strong for people with disabilities, like I call the professionals with disabilities community, the greatest untapped human potential on the planet. We are the pond that does not get fished in, right? And yet we have evidence with organizations that we work with, right? So average tenure is like 6.5 years now. So we don't job hop. We don't have the same opportunities to job hop, right? And it costs money with attrition, right? 63% of the folks that we play have been promoted at least one time. Average salary gain is more than 2x of gain. So they're not just staying there, they're being promoted. They're adding value to an organization's bottom line and culture. So
Can you walk us through what type of transformation it would look like for an organization through more inclusive and accessible practices for people with disabilities?
ooh, great question. We have so many examples of our partners right now that even while belts are being tightened, right, and there are lots of rifts that are being announced and have been announced here in early 2025. Organizations are protecting these FTEs, these individual contributors within these organizations, because again, it's and you would know that like those are the perfect time, like right if an organization's like, nope, we're not seeing the value, and yet these folks are being protected, right? And it's not because they're afraid of lawsuits or anything like that. These individuals are truly adding value to their organization's bottom line and culture, right? And when you're it's multifaceted. It's not just the end product, which is always a big thing. You just realize like so, and I've heard this a time or 12 over my career. They're like, it's really tough for me, Mike, to grumble about the drive in for me that took me 25 or 45 minutes when I see you with your cane and I see how much more effort you have to put in, and I hear that it took you 90 minutes and 3 buses to get to work. And it's really so when you start realizing like, okay, so there's some real culture building that happens organically when we're part of the team, right?
Yeah.
So it again, it's not this, and we never lead with like, oh, it's the poor me Olympics. Like it's worse to be blind than it is to be neurodivergent or in a wheelchair. Like it's not the poor me Olympics. But realizing like again, when you're adding these amazingly talented folks to your workforce, there are all these like adjacent markets. There are all these adjacent things that start happening to your team organically.
I'd love to talk about maybe a couple practical, immediate steps our audience can kind of take away to ensure their workplace is more inclusive and equitable. I know you talked about a lot of different ways people can do this, but can you leave us with a couple more, practical, immediate steps, something they can do right now? as they're listening and watching.
Yeah, I'll be honest. It really starts with another one of our, and I know they're a big supporter and probably a sponsor of SHRM, Randstad. So global, talent acquisition organization. Their CEO, one of their CEOs for Randstad Sourceright, Michael Smith, an amazing friend to BIT as well. So truly aiming to democratize the talent acquisition process to include professionals with disabilities. And it has to start with leadership. This isn't a bottom up. This won't happen grassroots. It has to be top down. So leadership like a Mike Smith, or the leadership like Mark Benioff and Parker Harris at Salesforce, and it takes these massive brands to realize okay, are we doing the best we can? And it's okay, right? If, the immediate answer is no or hell no, it's okay for that. And then it's taking it to the next level. Okay, so who can we lean in with to help us with this journey? Right. And it's just that. So it literally starts with just being curious a little bit and being okay with that answer when you ask the question. So are we doing everything we can when it comes to hiring professionals with disabilities? Are we? Right. And if your immediate answer even takes a few, well, maybe then you need to do a little bit more. And it just starts with leaning in.
Tamla Oates-Forney, our CEO of SHRM Linkage, he follows this CIAA model. Be curious first, be interested enough to want to make a difference, and then have accessibility to, the information, the data, and then advocacy for what needs to change. And obviously a lot of our work is for, gender inclusion and female advancement in the workplace, but it applies here as well. And I love that.
100%. And I was raised by a single mom.
Yeah.
So I tell folks all the time, so I do not believe that the disability conversation is any more important than gender equity, relationship orientation, ethnicity. I do not. I just want a seat at the table.
Yes. That's what it's so funny. It's what Tamla says. Yeah.
We are omitted from, and the statistics show this. They absolutely show this, that we are omitted from the vast majority of these talent acquisition conversations.
And Tamla says that too. It's not taking a chair away from somebody else at the table. It's just adding a chair and making the table bigger.
That's all we want. That's all
we all want.
Yeah, I don't want to be at the kids' table anymore. I just, let me just have a chance to talk about, again, the greatest untapped human potential on the planet.
All right. Is there anything you'd really want to leave our audience with, a final thought from you?
So first of all, I want to thank SHRM. Okay, so the platform that is SHRM is just unbelievable. We our trainings, the Art of Blinders, they're SHRM credentialed, so you can get SHRM credits with our courses. We did that very strategic, very intentional, because we know the weight that SHRM has, and letting folks know that the disability conversation is not a them. It really is an us conversation. If we're all so lucky, we're going to end up, and even if, you break a wrist, you sprain an ankle, that's all it takes. And you realize just how much this world wasn't designed for you. And there's organizations like BIT that are there to help you out with your journey. So please reach out. So thank you, Ann, for this opportunity.
Thank you. And tap into your brain and exercise your empathy muscle and lean in. Lessons for today.
Love it. Thank
you. Thank you so much, Mike, for your thoughtfulness, your insight, and your data-driven insight as well. We love data here at SHRM. So thank you so much for this engaging conversation.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, SHRM.
Okay, that's going to do it for this week's episode of All Things Work. Just head to shrm.org/allthingswork for our newsletter each week, and including research on these big topics. You can also follow us on social media to join the conversation. That'll be it for this week. We'll catch you next time.
SHRM.